Who has a question? Anyone?
Can I chime in then?
Yeah.
All right. So when you're at Act 2, Part 6, and you're transitioning into Act 3, Part 1, and you're at your lowest point, can you go back and forth? What I'm thinking now is I'm somewhere at that lowest point and formulating a new plan, which is part of Act 3, Part 1, and then you just keep going back and forth and experiencing new setbacks as you're crossing into that third act.
Hello, and welcome to The Storyteller's Mission with Zena, a podcast for artists and storytellers about changing the world for the better through story. Let me read what you asked. You said, Zena, can you clarify the transition between Act 2, Part 6 or the Act 2 turning point? Where does the lowest point go? Could Act 2, Part 6 end in a pit of despair, anxiety, or hopelessness? Or does Act 2, Part 6 conclude with realizing the protagonist's misfortune is like an incident or catalyst for change rather than an unfortunate circumstance or moral failing? Or does the hint at redemption come at the beginning of Part 3? In other words, does the protagonist's anxiety melt away at the end of Act 2, Part 6, or at the beginning of Act 3, Part 1? So that was your question. Is that still kind of what you're asking about?
That's exactly where I'm at.
Okay. And so trying to say in my email response to you, what I was trying to say is that it was a tricky question to answer because I felt like there were some assumptions that were false. Mm-hmm. The main assumption that I felt that you were making is that the anxiety would melt away at all. And there's no guarantee that any anxiety is going to melt away. So that's where I had asked for some clarity on that. Like, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about. But the clarification on the difference between the Act 2 turning point and Act 3, Part 1. I've always described, at least in the course, I've described Act 2 turning point, right before we go into Act 3, as being the all hope is lost moment. It's the lowest point for the character. But there's another way to look at it that might be helpful for people, because sometimes maybe it isn't all hope is lost. I mean, that kind of presupposes, it maybe superimposes a story beat that isn't appropriate for your story. If your character has to arrive at this place of hopelessness, maybe that's not the thing that happens in your story. So I think there's a way to modify that term that could be helpful, and that would be the point of no return. And what I mean by that is that regardless of where they're at emotionally, maybe it's not their most low point, but it is a point of no return, meaning they can no longer resist heading into the climax. They turned a point. It's the point of no return. The climax is coming. The showdown is coming. There's no way to stay in Act 2 where they've been relatively safe. Now they've got to go and face whatever it is. I mean, if you think about Act 2 as sort of being like they're in exile a little bit. Act 2 is the new world. So they're a little bit in exile. And so they're playing around in there. And a lot of things can happen in Act 2. But it's unfamiliar territory. They're having to explore. They're having to learn new things. They're acquiring new resources. They're acquiring new allies, but they're a little bit in exile. And at the end, at Act 2, the point of no return means they can no longer stay in the land of exile. They now have to go back to the land from whence they came. And that includes the conflict that drew them or threw them into exile in the first place. Whatever that thing is that made them leave town, they now have to come back and face it. And so it might not be the lowest point. It could be a moment of huge realization. It might be something they learned. I'm realizing, based on your question, Doug, that I used bad terminology in the course to imply a particular emotional state which may not be appropriate for all stories. And the real terminology that ought to be used is the point of no return. Because whatever happens at the end of Act 2 is a wake-up call or a shifting that happens internally in the character where they can no longer stay in exile. They have to enter back into the struggle. And that is why it starts picking up a pace. I've said before that when they get into Act 3, the conflict accelerates to a fever pitch. Well, the whole reason it accelerates to a fever pitch is because they have to actually go back into the world from whence they came. They can't stay in exile. And so that means they're closer and closer and closer to whatever it is that caused them to go into exile. And that means anxiety. And that's why I mean anxiety will probably be there. I don't think it ever melts away. What melts away is the doubt. See, while they're in exile, there's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of shifting. I mean, it could be doubt about a number of things. It could be doubt about their skills and abilities, but it could just be doubt about if this is something they have to do, or it could be doubt about how they're going to do it, whatever it is they have to do. By the time we go into Act 3, it's not that the doubt is gone in terms of their skills, but they have clarity to know that it doesn't matter. The clarity is, I have to face this no matter what. And that's why the stakes are so high, right? Because we actually shouldn't believe that the character is necessarily going to pull off whatever it is that they pull off. We don't know that they're going to win. And so anxiety is another way to say that there should still be a lot of tension and conflict in the story. The stakes are high because we don't know that they're going to win. They don't know that they're going to win. But what shifts is that they know they have to do it anyway. That's what brings them back into the old world, if you will, the original world, is that they realize they just can't stay out of it any longer. They have to face it. They have to face the music. Come hell or high water, whether they win or lose, they're in. And that's the fever pitch that's happening. Does that clarify this?
Yeah, that clarifies that.
It does?
Yes. That was great. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm glad that's helpful. So now I have to figure out if I need to go and add in an addendum to the course. I probably do. What I might do is just take what we've talked about here and try to do that. Because I do think that's an important clarification. It's not all hope is lost. It's the point of no return. The showdown is coming no matter what, and they can't avoid it any longer.
So that kind of parallels the original crossing the threshold at the end of the Act 1 turning point. But then now the stakes are higher at the Act 2 turning point, right?
However, before we get there, did you know that there are 7 crucial plot points that every story must hit in order to satisfy the audience? And if you miss even one of those crucial plot points, you risk losing your audience's attention forever. This is why I've created a free training video for you, where I break down exactly what these 7 deadly plot points are. These are the essential plot moments that you need to hit in order to deliver a powerful, compelling, page-turning story. So, be sure to check out my free training video on the 7 deadly plot points. It's going to transform your writing. Just click on the link provided in the notes or head over to thestorytellersmission.com and you can start watching this free training video right away. You're using terminology from other structure books, which is fine. It's fine, but I'm going to take it back to my terminology. So at the end of Act 1, when they go into Act 2, it's the Act 1 turning point, which means they have to leave the normal world and go into the new world. That's all it means. They're forced into the new world. They can no longer stay in the old world for whatever reason. So that's the crossing of the threshold. Now, at the end of Act 2, they have to go back to the old world or the old conflict or whatever. They have to go back and face the thing that they've been avoiding this whole time or that they weren't able to face. So this is Harry Potter. In the very last movies and the book of Harry Potter, he's kind of in exile. He's hiding. He and Hermione and Ron initially go out and are hiding because they've left the school. Now, they do have a goal. They're trying to get these Horcruxes. They're trying to find these Horcruxes, but they've had to go into hiding. They've had to completely go off the grid. They're not at school. They're not doing any of those things because they have a clear goal, but they're certainly not facing Voldemort. For crying out loud, they're just going after the Horcruxes. And so we spend a great deal of time in Act 2 where they are having this other mission that they're doing. It's not the ultimate mission. The ultimate mission is to face Voldemort. And that's when we do the shift, when it's inevitable. And what happens to them in Act 2 at the end is they get caught and they get brought to now the gig is up. They're caught. And now he's going to have to face Voldemort whether he wants to or not. And the reason it's the low point for him in that story is because his friends' lives, they're probably going to be killed. What is he going to do? That's in the first part. They broke the movie up into 2 parts. So I'm talking the first part of the last book. Oh, I know. You had asked, is it the same thing as the crossing the threshold? And in a way it is. It's just the reverse. right? They're going back to the original world. That's all, because they can't avoid it. But probably under new circumstances. I mean, certainly not necessarily with all the advantages they had initially. I mean, that's the thing. So it's not exactly the same. It's the new. It goes back to the old world, but things have changed. And they're at a gross disadvantage now. So that's important in terms of keeping the stakes high.
Thank you for listening to The Storyteller's Mission with Zena Del Lowe. May you go forth inspired to change the world for the better through story.